Welcome to Maximizer 101 for Financial Advisors, the first of 3 training sessions designed to help you get a really good handle on how Maximizer can help you do your job easier and more efficiently. We'll review some of the items that you were introduced to when you began with Maximizer. Then we'll look at adding entries, finding them, contacting them, keeping track of what you do with them, and then we'll take a look at how you can make Maximizer's workspace your very own. Finally, we'll review some of the support resources that are available to help you with all of this. Let's begin by logging into Maximizer and then looking at modules, menus, and tab following windows. If you are new to Maximizer and/or new to the financial services firm that you're working with, when you first open Maximizer, you might kind of be wondering just what all of this is. This area in here is your main controlling window, and whatever entry you're highlighting in this window up here is going to control the information that you'll see in the tab following windows down here. The modules on the left over here will give you information relative to your whole database, but the tab following windows will give you information specific to the entry that you're highlighting up here. And then the drop-down menus here will allow you to do various things with the entries that you're working with right here. During this session, we'll review some of the things you can do in the drop-down menus. In the 102 class, we'll take a tighter look at some of these modules here, but in our session today, let me review the Details tab and the Custom tab out of all of your tab following windows. The Details window allows you to keep track of basic information about the contact that you're looking at up here. For example, phone numbers, addresses, email addresses. Furthermore, while I might have been pointing at Ruth Simpson up here, if I hover over to the left, I can go to the household or I can go to her husband, George. I don't have to just stay with Ruth. In other words, even though I'm pointing at Ruth up here, I can switch to George by clicking right here. This area to the right contains what we call key field lists. For example, I can click here and select basic information, and I get to see information related specifically to George. Maximizer is a natural repository of all the critical information that a financial advisor is going to need. If you happen to be an assistant to that financial advisor, your job is to get so familiar with where to find all that information that when you're asked for a certain piece of information, you know exactly where to go to get it. We'll talk in detail about creating key field lists and creating the user-defined fields that support key field lists in our 102 class. As you look at all these tab following windows, you realize that there are quite a few of them. The Custom tab has been designed to allow you to see in one place several of these other tabbed windows for your convenience. In this Custom tab window, you notice that I've got the Contacts tab here so that I don't have to flip out and go there to find it. I have a Notes window here, again so I don't have to go here. And on this side, I have a couple of the key field lists that otherwise I would have to go back to Details for. I can click here on Edit Layout if I would like to change the way anything looks in my Custom tab window. So for example, I can come down here into the lower right and click Add a Widget. When I do that, I realize I've already got Contacts, the Notes timeline, and I've got the key field windows available. What I don't have is the Notes list and Files and Activities. So why don't I select Activities? When I do that, it shows up for me right there. I'll click Add Widget again, and this time I'll take the General Notes list, and it places it right here for me. This is the normal way I look at notes rather than the timeline way of looking at notes up here. And then finally, I'll click on Files, and Maximizer will add that for me right there. I drop out of the Widgets window, I click Save. These windows are now locked in place as you see them, but if I ever want to change that, I simply go back to Edit Layout again. I can click an X here to remove one of the windows. I can also resize or relocate these windows, whatever kind of suits me best. And when I'm done, I click Save. One other neat thing about this window is that if I want to, I can click this little button here and expand that tab window to my full screen size. And of course here I have this button that allows me to delete the entry that I'm looking at if it is no longer important to me. And finally, I can click my filter button up here if I want to only look at certain types of notes rather than all selected as you're seeing there now. In this next segment, we're going to take a look at adding entries, particularly looking at the kinds of entries that we actually can add. To add an entry, I simply come up to this drop-down menu here where it says Edit. I can add a company, a household, or a contact. I can also click up here and make a selection of company, household, and contact and click the plus button to add that kind of entry. Or I can right-click anywhere in place here and again add a company, household, and contact. Now let me show you something that's kind of important about this. I'm going to come here to View and Clear the List, which means I'm sending all those entries back into the filing cabinet as it were. Now if I want to add an entry, I come up here to Edit, and look, I can still add a company or a household, but I can't add a contact because that's grayed out. The reason is because a company and household are what we call parent entries in our database, and a contact is a child entry. In our database, a contact has to be associated with either a household or a company. This is the child entry, and these are the parent entries. I want to add Helen Jepson to my database. I met her at a conference. She wants to have some information from me. I want to add her into my database. In order to do that, I'm going to go to Edit and add a household, or I'm going to select up here and add a household and click the plus button, or as I said, I could right-click in place and add a household. I have to add the household first in order to have an entity to which I can attach Helen. Well, as it turned out, Helen is single, and I will put her in as her own household. The red border around here means that this is a mandatory field. I will identify this as the Helen Jepson household. I'll come down and put a phone number in here for her, and I will add an email address for her, and I will scroll down and add her household address. If I have more information over here under household information, I will add that. I may not know enough about her yet, so I'll go ahead and click Save. Now that the household is in place, the contact option is no longer grayed out, and I can select it. As with the household, the mandatory field was last name, so I go ahead and put in Helen Jepson. You notice that she inherits the phone number and the address, but not the email address. I'll go ahead and click Save. As a final note in this segment, you have just seen that it's easy to make a single entry into Maximizer. But if I have been to a conference and I picked up information on 60 or 70 different people, I might find it a lot easier to enter their information into an Excel spreadsheet and then come down here and click on Import and import that XLS sheet. When I do that, I'm presented with this import utility. Relatively straightforward to take care of. However, we'll discuss that in the Maximizer 103 class. What you may want to do in the meantime is go up here and click on this little video icon and learn for yourself in advance of that class how to do this import. Now I'm going back to the contact list and back to the list of entries I had before I went to View and Clear List. I sent Helen Jepson back into the filing cabinet so that I could show you how to find her and to find other entries as well. One way to find Helen is to click on Search and Last Name and put her name in here. Look for households or contacts. I can replace this list here with the results of this search, or if I wanted to keep this list and just add Helen to it, I could click this radio button, Add Search Results to List, or if I had a list of several hundred people in my main window here, I might want to narrow that list instead. In our example, I'll continue with this radio button to replace the list with the search results, check all entries, and click OK. And there's the Helen Jepson household and Helen Jepson again, just as we entered them. I'll click Undo Search, and this time I'll come up here into our quick search area and start to type Helen. As soon as I do that, I see various options for Helen, but I can see the Helen Jepson name right here as well, and if I continue typing, the suggested list will narrow itself down to the two Helen Jepsons. At this point, I can select one or the other, but if I continue typing to get the full name, I can then either hit Enter or click Search and bring back both of the names again as we had started. Once again, I'll undo the search, and this time I'll put a plus in front of Helen Jepson's name and click search, and this will add Helen Jepson as a household and as a contact to the list that we have been working with right from the beginning. Let me show you one other neat wrinkle. Look at this household here, the Sam and Gloria Westland household. If you search through the list that we've got here, all I find is Gloria Westland. I do not find her partner, Sam. If I want him to be part of this list as well, I highlight that entry, I go to Search, Retrieve Contacts. The result is that I not only have the Gloria Westland now in this list, but I also have Sam Westland in this list as well. If I needed to go in the other direction, I could, for example, select Rod Roberts or Jessica Jones from their household, and I could go to Search and Retrieve Household here, and that would add their household into this list as well. One final searching wrinkle. If I want to, I can go to View All Entries and see every single entry that I've got in my database. Or I can say, show me all companies and households, or I can say, show me all the contacts that I have in the database. If I click on all contacts, I end up with only contacts in my main window here, and I notice that I've got 140 displayed and all 140 are contacts. From time to time, you may need to be able to do that search. If you do that search, note that the Search Undo search capability is not available to you in this situation. In Maximizer 102, I'll show you how to quickly get back to the list that I started with. And now that we're here, let's look at how to contact these folks by phone, by email, and by snail mail. If you call George, for example, I would recommend that you click this phone icon right here. Another way to create the call is to come up to Actions and make a call. However, if you do this and then click Answered when the call goes through, you will notice that Maximizer is tracking this call as if it occurred with Ruth, which makes perfect sense because the action button up here is associated with the person that's highlighted up here. Whereas if I make the call down here by clicking on the phone icon, Maximizer will associate this call with George, which in this case is what I want. Maximizer gives me an editable list over here where I can select the subject of this call, which was for an appointment, but I could also add a lot of other alternatives if I clicked on the edit list and added them in. I keep this call with George, I enter in notes about the call, and after I hang up, I can click Save. Maximizer asks me what the result of this call was, and I click here Appointment Arranged, but you notice I could add other alternatives as well. And then I click OK. Maximizer now asks me if I want to schedule a follow-up activity. This actually goes into the next segment of our session today, and rather than jump ahead, for now, I'll just simply click Cancel. But you'll notice that if I come to my notes window here now for George, I'm still looking at George, here's the note that I made from that call with him. One of the reasons I like to record calls that way, either by making a call or receiving a call, is because I can go over to Report and I can report on incoming versus outgoing calls. If I am an assistant to an advisor, he or she might ask me to report on the calls that I did on this particular day, or perhaps even for all dates. And if I update the report, I can indicate how many outgoing calls I've made, how many incoming calls I've taken, and you'll notice that this is reportable on all of the users in the office who are licensed to use Maximizer. Not only can I generate this overall report, but my advisor can go into details on the report, and you'll notice right away, here's the call that I did today, and again I can click on details one more time and look at the specifics of that particular call. And by the way, I can report on it through Excel, PDF, and Word. Let's jump out and let's take a look at email. After calling George, perhaps what I need to do is send him an email. So I click on his email address. This brings up the email dialog box where I can put in the subject of the email, the notes that I want to send along to him. I can also come down here and make sure I'm saving a copy to my entries files, as well as the message body in a note. My final point to check is to come up here under email type and select whether I'm going to send this as a marketing email or a service announcement, and that depends on the anti-spam protection I have invoked in Maximizer. I go ahead and click send, and then come down to my files window and see the email as I sent it. If I click on that email, I see that Maximizer has recorded this as a marketing email, plus I have the option to reply, reply all, forward, or print, as you would expect with any normal email. It's important to remember that when you send email from within Maximizer, it goes directly out to the internet through our own SMTP servers rather than going through Outlook or any other email client. So again, when you send an email from within Maximizer, remember to make sure there's a checkbox here to save a copy to the entries files if you want to have a copy of that sent email. Next, let's suppose we want to send an email to everybody in my list here. I'll click up here to select all of them, then I'll deselect a household, but I've still got all the rest of my contacts selected, and I'll come up to Actions and write an email. I'll change the selection here to All Selected and click OK. Maximizer points out to me that one or more of the selected entries do not have email addresses, they've been skipped, which is kind of like saying, why didn't you check this first guy before you did this? But in this case, I'll have to click OK. And I notice also, though, that my list has been merged to the email I'm going to be sending here. In other words, the people who are the recipients of this group email will not see each other's email address. And I can do this really neatly. I'll show you in Preferences in just a moment. I don't have to use the BCC facility for that. I can simply go directly. As before, I put in the subject and the particulars of my email, and look at this, I have a little space right there. I'm going to highlight that and delete that underscore because I'm next going to click on this. When I hover on this button, it says Merge Field. I'll click on Merge Field. I'll scroll down, pick first name, make sure it's selected, and then click OK. Maximizer now puts that merge field right there in the body text of my email where I want it to be. And just so you know, I could personalize the subject line up here if I wanted to. I could also add in other user-defined fields or basic fields in the body text of my email simply by using this Merge Field button. In case I might want to use this particular email again, without having to redesign it, I can click on this button, which when I hover says Template. I can click on it. When this template library box comes up, I can click Add. I can give my new template a name and click OK, and it now becomes part of my email template library, which means I can use it again and again and again. When I want to use it again, I simply open up the email dialog box, click on the template icon, come down to that email template itself, click on it, retrieve it. Maximizer says, are you sure you want to replace all the message content here with a selected template? I click OK. And of course, it's the same that I've been using, but you can imagine that this could be different and could be replaced by whatever happens to be in that template from my template library. The last thing to check again is email type. And in this case, I'll just call it a service announcement, and I'll click Send. Once again, I can click any entry, come down to the Files window, and I can see the email that was sent to that group. For the final thing in this section, I'll just come back over to the Details window, and I'm going to come up here and click on the W that represents a link to Microsoft Word. When I click on that, I open a Microsoft Word document, and you'll look along the top here and you'll see that I have a Maximizer ribbon. When I click on that, I can click on Labels or Envelopes if I have something that I need to mail to this group of people and it has to go by snail mail. So I click on Labels. I can pretty much ignore all of this up here and simply click on Generate Mailing Labels. Here's where I get to choose the vendor and the kind of label that I want to use, and then click OK. Maximizer generates all of these labels and gives me a chance to check each one of them, make sure they're complete before I print them out and use them to mail whatever I have to send. If I need to do envelopes, it's pretty much the same. I click on Envelopes. I add in a return address if there isn't one already printed on my envelopes. Then I click Generate Envelopes. Now I select the size of envelope I want to use. take a look at these particulars here, click on Printing Options, and tell Maximizer how I will be feeding the envelopes into the printer so that Maximizer can match the printing to the envelopes. And then I click OK. As with the labels, I can check each envelope to make sure that the information is complete before I go ahead and print. Before we leave this section on communicating or contacting our entries, let me just make mention of the anti-spam protection that Maximizer has built in. To activate it, you need to go to Administration and turn on Administrator. Then go to System Fields and expand the list next to Contact List, expand this next to Email Types, and add in the kind of emails that you're likely to be sending out. A service announcement, for example, does not require permission from recipients, whereas a marketing announcement does require permission from recipients before you send it. As you can see, this is simply a toggle switch. Either permission is required or it's not required. You can have as many different email types as you want simply by adding new email value, but in each case, you will have to decide whether or not that particular type of email requires permission to be sent or not. In Canada, the anti-spam legislation is called CASL, Canadian Anti-Spam Legislation. In the US, it's called CAN-SPAM, and in Europe, it's called GDPR, General Data Protection Resolution. We have a nice little video on anti-spam legislation that you'll want to watch. It's more particularly designed for CASL in Canada, but it certainly has applicability to the US and also to Europe with its GDPR. Once you have enacted the anti-spam protection, you can come down to Edit Any Given Entry, come down to their email address here, click the plus button over here, and then indicate that they have opted in for marketing email or not. If they've opted in, for the CASL legislation, the only field here that matters is the expiry date. If it's left blank, Maximizer will assume that you have full consent from that recipient to send them marketing-based email. In our next segment, we're going to take a quick look at how to keep track of the interactions that you've had with any given entry. You saw earlier when I was communicating with George Smithson and I called him that I was able to keep track of the result of that call by having a note generated automatically by Maximizer. From time to time, when I talk further with George, I may want to come back over to my notes window and click here to add a manual note to document an interaction that I had with him. The note can be date and time stamped, identified by the creator, full access to myself, which means I control the note, public access so anybody else in the office can see it, and then I can select a category that might be appropriate for this particular note, or leave it blank if that would be appropriate as well. Once I click OK and refresh, that note becomes a permanent part of the record of my interactions with George. If I want to remember something important that I have to do with George or for him, I would come over to my Activities window here and click here to add a task. I indicate what the activity is going to be, and I select a date, decide whether I take care of it myself or whether I should assign that task to somebody else, and once I've made my decisions, I click OK. You notice this now shows up in the Activities window as a task associated with George. Remember what I said before? Things that you see over here in the tab following windows are specific to people that you're looking at up here, whereas over here it's generalized to the database. Well, this particular task here is going to show up over here in my hot list window, along with any other tasks that I happen to have associated with other entries in my database as well. Up here, I can decide how I want to filter this. I can look at tasks for this month, next week, etc., or a custom one if there's a particular date range I'm interested in. I can also click on this filter here and check my activities or activities of all users or selected users, and I can carry forward unfinished tasks. I can also show completed tasks. When I jump back into my contact list and come again to my activities window, I can also schedule an appointment with George. George and I decided we would get together next Wednesday, June 26th, and we thought we would do this at around 10 a.m. and we decided to allocate a full hour for our meeting. We'll be meeting at his local Starbucks, and the purpose of the meeting is to discuss his insurance needs. If somebody else from the office needs to attend as well, I can start to type in their name here, select the person that comes up, and now we have a meeting that includes me as the organizer and both of these other two people as well. When I click Save, Maximizer gives me the option to notify the appointment attendees by email. If I click Yes, a reminder email will be sent to George, to myself, and to Christina. Now if I go over to Calendar, the appointment I made shows up right here on the 26th as expected. Here's another interesting wrinkle. If Christina is the financial advisor and I'm her assistant, and I want to make an appointment for her, and I have access to her calendar, I can simply make the selection here to act as if I am Christina. I can double click where an appointment has to be made, and when it comes up, you will notice that Christina is now identified as the organizer of this particular appointment. When I complete the rest of the details and press Save, the email reminder that comes up for the appointment will indicate that the appointment was made by me on behalf of Christina Donato. That might be important for her to have a client see that. You will also note that both of these appointments here are identified in pink. When I switch the calendar back over to me, the appointment that I created that includes me goes back to my color. This one stays pink for her, and it still shows up on my calendar because I put a check mark over here indicating that I want to be able to see Christina's appointments as well. And the reason that works is because we have given each other permission to see each other's calendar. Two more interesting points. If I come down to Administration and Notification Manager, I have the ability to set up a situation whereby I can have notifications occur automatically when certain things within the contact list or within accounts happen. We have a nice little video up here that will show you exactly how to set this up and how to make it useful. When you were onboarded, you probably had not only the Microsoft Word integration set up for you, but also the Outlook integration, and that has some important factors for you. When I open Outlook, this integration allows me to have two buttons here on the home ribbon for Outlook where I can identify an email and I can save it to Maximizer, to an address book entry, to accounts, to cases, to leads. I can check to view the contact in Maximizer, or I can flip over to the Maximizer ribbon itself and do the same things here again, and also adjust the Outlook preferences here in case I need to change those. For particulars, you will want to check the video on the Outlook integration. You have already seen how the Files tab following window can include copies of emails that have been sent from within Maximizer, but you can also click here, browse to anywhere that you have access to on your computer or on your network, and/or drag and drop files into the Files window. This can include contracts, permissions to trade, insurance documents, any number of different kinds of files you can keep here on a client-by-client basis. In our final segment today, we'll take a look at how you can modify the look and feel of Maximizer so that it more closely matches the way you think of your work and the way you do it. If you come up here and click on this gear, and then click on Other Preferences, in here you can tell Maximizer that you want to share access to your calendar and to your hot list with all the other users. This is how you can set appointments back and forth for each other and also set tasks for each other as well. When I click up here under Email, this is where I can tell Maximizer that when I send email to multiple entries, I set the default as separately, which then means that when I create a bulk email, the email will merge to the list, as I showed you a bit earlier. Here's where you can tell Maximizer to save a copy of the message to the entries files and include the message body in the note. You saw that this can be done on the fly when you actually start your email message, but by putting a check mark here, you take one more thing off your plate that you have to remember. If I click on this button here, I can set up or modify the signature that I attach to my emails. Finally, if I click on Startup, I can tell Maximizer that when I open my Maximizer, I want it to open up on my contact list or on my calendar, hot list, accounts, leads, dashboard. Any of the modules can be selected for my startup place. And I can also tell Maximizer that when I actually do go to my contact list, I want to view the list from the last session, or there's a favorites list or a saved search I want to see, or I can select to open up at an empty list. Most users will generally pick this one, on the premise that whatever I finish today might still have some carryover for tomorrow, so I don't mind at least taking a look at where I was when I shut down yesterday before I begin my new work for today. When I've made all the changes and preferences that I want, I click OK. And before I click Save, I do one more thing. I click here to customize the icon bar. And if there are elements of the icon bar that I do not want to see, for example, campaigns, quotas, knowledge base, perhaps office files, I can indicate by crossing out the icon here so that when I click OK and then click Save, I can reduce the visual clutter over here on the left side of my main screen. In similar fashion, I can click this little plus mark within a circle here, and again, check off those elements that I do not want to see or do not need to see. And when I click OK, and the visual clutter has been reduced here as well. But in point of fact, if I'm going to make use of my custom tab, I could uncheck contacts, notes, files, and activities because I can see windows for all of those underneath my custom tab. In other words, I can actually simplify all the way down to this. Finally, you can change the information that you're looking up here simply by changing what we call a column setup. Let me show you. If I go to View, Column Setup, and if I'm in all column setups here instead of just my column setups, by default, Maximizer will show me the column setup that I currently am using. From here, I can add and create a brand new column setup. I can take the current column setup and save it as a new name, so I'm working with something and then just modify that. Or I can click on Properties to modify the column setup I'm currently using. This video here will show you how to do this in detail, but very quickly I can click Add and then insert a field right here and insert any basic field or any user-defined field into this new column that has been reserved for me. On the other hand, if there is a column that I do not want, I can highlight it here and click Delete. After I've made any changes that I want to, I click OK, and then I click Use Now. And any modifications I made in the selection of columns that I want to include in this column setup will then be reflected in the data that is shown to me. When we began, I said I wanted to show you some of the support resources that we have available. Well, for starts, as you know, in many places within the product, we have this little video icon. When you click on it, you get to watch a video that's specific to the area that you happen to be in at the moment. You can also come up here to our Help Center, click on it, click on General Help, click on Video Tutorials, and then roll over to YouTube, where our whole video library is presented to you in the same sequence in which you see it in CRM 101, 102, and 103. And then finally, you can come over to our website, www.maximizer.com, come to Resources and Help Center, and then click on Contact Support. This brings up this very simple page where you can give us your name and email address, tell us where you're from, give us a short description of how we can help you, and submit the form, and we'll get back to you right away. You can also call us at this toll-free number in North America. In the Middle East and Europe and Africa, you can call this number here, and in Australia and New Zealand, you can call this number. Over here, you can also click down on the lower right on our chat bubble and open up a conversation with one of our customer service specialists. We are absolutely dedicated to help you master Maximizer. We hope to see you in Maximizer 102 and 103. Bye for now.